link to work. All right, let's go for it. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Well, glad to be here. Hopefully you guys are having a great day. Thanks for joining us. So this is Ask the Experts. What we're going to be talking about today, hopefully I think is of value to anyone obviously using ServiceNow in the SecOps community. This is how to use some of the new integrations that I'm from Zscaler has been developing with ServiceNow to help improve the response time that you guys can do when you are dealing with threats. So with me from ServiceNow is Adam Horwitz. Adam, you want to introduce yourself for the crew here?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I've been with ServiceNow for 4 years, and I'm a product specialist for the security operations solution, which includes security incident response that we're presenting today.
Great, thanks to have you with us, Adam. Again, my name is Steve Grossenbacher. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Zscaler. So I'm going to spend some time talking about what this integration is. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit. We'll talk about the integration. Adam's going to come back and he's going to walk us through a demo so you guys can see how this all comes together across the ServiceNow platform. But with that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the challenges. I'm going to set the stage a couple with a few slides, and then I'm going to go into, if you're not familiar with who Zscaler are, we're going to do that, and then I'll talk about the integration. So I don't think there's any surprise in some of the challenges that SecOps and security IT people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Certainly ransomware is at an all-time high. Every week you see another news article about a ransomware breach. The name of the game is how do you reduce the dwell time of these threats that are coming into your environment. And that's certainly, as your, as what you're doing, SecOps is trying to kind of shorten that dwell time. The other thing, obviously, is that, security has traditionally been perceived as no, and you want to switch that narrative to a yes, right? You really want to be able to say, hey, you're allowed to use a BYOD device. You're allowed to do some of these things that traditionally would have been risky, but now that you've got the ability to do some of these things, to be able to switch that narrative. And then lastly, some of the challenges is that security sometimes is kind of overlooked from a budget perspective, right? It's really only a small fraction of what you're spending, but it's delivering a tremendous value. So we really kind of want to try to think about how we can unify some of these things and use some of these integrations to really help kind of switch that narrative. So with that being said, I thought I'd put this slide up here. I know that, as a SecOps person, you probably have a fairly decent idea of the security posture across your environment. Maybe you don't. So we have some tools at Zscaler, which I thought I might let you become aware of. You may try to use this and it may help you uncover some gaps that you weren't aware of, right? So we have a tool which is called a security assessment. I'll build this slide out. You can use this tool to gauge a couple different things. We often have prospects and customers not be familiar with how many open servers are publicized on the internet. So we have a tool which allows us to go and we use publicly available resources, and we generate a tool that says, okay, here's all the exposed cloud instances and exposed servers that are on your domain that are accessible by the internet. So you can use your tool to get that report. We also have a tool which allows you to gauge the security posture across your security stack. So we can tell you how much SSL you're inspecting. We can tell you if you're not inspecting SSL and there's things that are getting by because of a lack of SSL inspection. We typically see across the G2000 that a good portion of large companies fail the SSL inspection test, which helps you understand where your vulnerabilities might be. And then, of course, there's other tests in this tool that allow you to understand if ransomware can get through, if you're should be doing certain things. So it may come in handy to you. It's called Zscaler.com Security Assessment. You see the URL there. I just kind of wanted to kind of open that up before we get into is okay, how it might be useful for you. So if you're not familiar with Zscaler, we are the leader in cloud security. We are the largest cloud security platform. So we have over 150 data centers across the globe that allow users and businesses to basically transform their security into a SASE platform, right? So we deliver this any-to-any connectivity. So any user on or off network can securely connect to any application, whether it be internal SaaS or the internet, and it travels through Zscaler. We process over 150 billion daily transactions. That's increasing all the time. So it's 15x the amount of Google searches. And what we're allowing customers to do is essentially deliver this zero trust connection between any users and any application, and reduce the requirements of appliances and legacy VPNs, and transition that to a built for purpose SASE platform. Just a couple of our larger customers who are using Zscaler. And when you embrace Zscaler, obviously you get tremendous advantages, whether that be a faster user experience, because you're not forcing users down through the data center. You have always on security, so every user on off network gets better protection. And of course, by embracing a cloud versus legacy appliances, you can reduce cost. But that's not why we're here. I want to talk a little bit about the service, but before we do that, just a kind of idea of the products we offer. We offer a Zscaler Internet Access, which allows you to access internet and SaaS, right? So we are delivering things like Cloud Sandbox, Cloud Firewall, URL filtering, everything for threat intelligence to be able to allow you to safely access SaaS and internet. We have a legacy replacement for VPN that allows you to do a inside-out connection for remote access. So instead of using a legacy VPN, you can do an inside-out connection. So you put a connection in front of your cloud or your data center, and you put a connection on the endpoint, and those connect securely into our cloud. So you stitch together that connection without having to put a user on a network or on a VPN and opening yourself up to lateral movement. And of course, we have a digital experience monitoring tool, which allows you to tell if any of these connections are performing problematically. We can highlight if there's an outage in, let's say it's a box in New York versus a box in San Francisco, or if a user has a problematic Wi-Fi. We roll all that up into a very unique, succinctly experience that you can understand. But for our ServiceNow integration, let's talk about what we're doing with ServiceNow to help kind of streamline some of these workflows. The first thing is, obviously, ServiceNow is, as you embrace ServiceNow, it becomes an integral part of your day-to-day workflow, right? You can build workflows out across the board, and the more, obviously, you leverage the ServiceNow, the more it streamlines processes, it streamlines workflows, but you have to put data into it, right? So as this data goes into ServiceNow, sometimes you may not know what the visibility across the data that's going into ServiceNow. And the question, which was often asked, is, okay, is there sensitive data in ServiceNow that I need to be aware of? And then how is that data being accessed? Right. So that's a challenge that sometimes we're running up against. The other one is, how do I enable access control that limits risk? With more and more users working remotely, a lot of times users may be using BYOD devices that may not be managed, right? So this may be a laptop, that is a secondary laptop, or it might be a unmanaged device. How do I allow that person to get access to data inside of ServiceNow, but limit my exposure to that device, right? That device may end up going someplace else, or I don't know what's happening on that device. They have a legitimate access to data, but I don't want to have that data persist, or I don't want to expose myself to risk. You can also think of this from a B2B perspective. Maybe there's a partner or vendor that needs to get access to maybe a instance inside of ServiceNow or data inside of ServiceNow. Same aspect. How do I limit that risk? And then lastly, it's all about speeding up response time and being able to minimize that dwell time, which we talked about. How do I respond quicker to incidents? How do I build better processes across my teams so that I'm able to respond quicker? And be able to minimize the impact that these threats can have across my organization. So with that, so let's get into the integrations that we've built with ServiceNow. The first one is an integration with SecOps, which allows you as an administrator, SecOps user, to respond quicker to information that is set into ServiceNow and leverage the value of the Zscaler platform to respond quicker to these incidents. So I have a slide on this. I'll talk about that. I also have a slide on the second one, which is BYOD use case, which we talked about. How do I enable access by unmanaged devices into data without exposing myself to risk? And what we're doing here is we're using browser isolation and leveraging the power of streaming pixels down to the endpoint in order to enable this. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And there's two other ones which I'll touch on, not necessarily probably relevant to what you're doing, but you may find value. So I'll touch on that a little bit. But let's get into it and talk about the SecOps workflow a little bit. What we've done here is we've built an integration with ServiceNow SecOps that allows you to augment your processes and speed up how you respond to threats. So sending data into SecOps, you may be sending this from a number of different locations. It may be across the board, but a traditional one may be from a SIEM. So you are sending certain data or threat intelligence into your SecOps ServiceNow. What Zscaler can do can help you to augment that. So across Zscaler, we have threat intelligence. These may be IOCs from our Sandbox. This may be IOCs from any of the threat intelligence we have. You can then send that information into ServiceNow. And what happens is then through your workflows, which Adam's going to show, is you can increase the context and threat understanding response time so that you can pivot quicker on any observable. So if there's an observable inside of the SecOps that you want to understand, you can pull that information in from Zscaler. And then if you so choose, you can then force an update back into Zscaler on any of these to block across our cloud, right? So across any user on or off network, you can then force that block, which allows you to then respond quicker and minimize the dwell time that this threat might have within your environment. Right. So of course, the benefits of this is obviously you can leverage the power of our threat library. Now, again, Zscaler is looking across all users on and off networks across your organization. So there's great fidelity that you can capture from a threat library inside your SecOps workflows. And of course, you can respond quicker to emerging threats by enforcing that blocking down into our Zscaler exchange. Now, the second integration which we have, which I think is pretty powerful, is the idea to support the BYOD use case. Now, how that works is essentially, if a user is trying to access a ServiceNow, they may be multiple tenants or multiple instances that they maybe want to go across, and you may have some reason to limit the ability for them to get access to this data. So what you can do is you can force a redirect before they log into ServiceNow to go into Zscaler. And Zscaler can then check through our identity proxy to say, okay, is this a managed or an unmanaged device? If it's a device that's unmanaged, what we can do is then we can force a policy which then kicks that user over into an isolated browser. Now, what an isolated browser is doing is essentially grabbing that information down. It's rendering it inside of a browser, inside of our cloud, and then pixels are streamed down to the endpoint. So what that does is allows that user to interact with data, but in a safe way, right? So there is no cutting or pasting or printing or downloading because it's an interactive pixels from a browser inside of a cloud instead of allowing that data to go all the way down. Now, if you're familiar with CASBs typically try to do this with what's called a reverse proxy, and it's a very difficult thing to set up. A lot of times it breaks a lot of apps. So it's a way to deliver this BYOD unmanaged experience without the proxy headaches, right? So two use cases for this. Certainly if you have B2B customers who want to access data, but you don't want to actually give them full data, you can do that. And also, like I mentioned with the workforce, you can do that so they can use an untrusted device to access. There might be specific tenants that you may want them to access or not access. The last two I just want to touch on is we can actually help you speed up the way you understand misconfigurations inside of tenants. So this is called SSPM. It stands for SaaS Security Posture Management. You may be familiar with this big brother, which is called Cloud Security Posture Management, CSPM. But both of these technologies, they scan cloud platforms for misconfigurations. So they can go in there and they can tell you things like if it's Office 365, there's an account that doesn't have multi-factor authentication. or it can look at your AWS instance and tell you that there's an open S3 bucket. And so it scans all this environment, it brings it back, and it tells you risk ranked, what's the most risky misconfiguration down to stuff that you may not have a risk aversion to, but may be good to set up. So for example, in Salesforce, you don't have login hours set for Steve, right? So only set him for 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. He shouldn't be logging into Salesforce at 10 o'clock at night. So you can understand these risks, and then you can create an automatic ticket and send that into ServiceNow, right? You can send that off to the appropriate team or the purpose or workflow, or you can fast pass that, and you can say, okay, I want to close this. So this workflow allows you to understand risk inside of clouds and then put that into your ServiceNow workflows and build a process around that and to help speed up things. The last one is just true blue data protection. We have DLP and we have CASB, so you can control what sensitive data should be going into ServiceNow, and if you want to block that, and you can do this based upon compliance if you're you're doing PCI or PHI, and then you can also scan through ServiceNow instances for sensitive data and understand if it also has PCI or PHI, and then you can create some policies based upon that. So those are the kind of aspects that we're doing, the integrations across the board. The last slide I want to talk about before I give it over to Adam, we can double click on the SecOps flow, is kind of the structure of the packaging of Zscaler Internet Access. If you kind of want to understand, if, hey, this sounds interesting, maybe I want to look at this, here's how it kind of rolls out. There's different packages. You can see that there's additive sort of features built in. The typical one is either the business or transformation, where a lot of organizations land in. That gives you the threat protection, that gives you the CASB and DLP. When you go to transformation, that gives you the sandbox ability. So if you're doing that threat intelligence with SecOps lookups, you're going to want to probably land on that one, because then it allows you to get a lot of the fidelity from the observables in your SecOps module to help understand what type of threat intelligence we're seeing across some of these files. And then of course, you can go with the ELA as well. So that's it for me. I'm going to transfer it over to Adam, who's going to then walk us through the demo on this SecOps. So Adam, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to send it back to you.
Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
So I've got a slide that I'm going to show first. Do a little baseline setting. All right, so you should be looking at a slide that shows the architecture of our solution. So what we're talking about today with regards to the integration with Zscaler is specific to the Security Incident Response app from ServiceNow, which is part of our SOAR, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response solution, which also includes vulnerability. And so I thought it might be helpful to put this slide up and sort of illustrate where the Zscaler integration is going to fit in. Now, this is purpose-built for security incident response, the key word of that solution being response. And so where this is going to tie in, Zscaler ties in as, comes into play as an activity sensor, also a threat intelligence solution, and also an orchestration solution for response. The idea is that we're using telemetry from Zscaler to create a security incident and or to enhance a security incident that maybe was created through an alert from some other security tool. And then as part of that response process of triaging that security incident, you're naturally going to want to perform some sort of a response, right? And typical, typical response might be something like blocking, I know this says firewall, but for this context, same thing, blocking a port, blocking a URL, doing something with a hash, right? So high level, this is the security incident response solution as part of our SOAR solution. So I thought it'd be helpful to show where the Zscaler integration is available on the store. We publish all of the integrations for security operations at store.servicenow.com. And they have certain dependencies. So this integration is going to require security incident response pro level packaging or security operations enterprise level packaging, because this does leverage threat intelligence and some other modules in security incident response. This app, this integration is purpose-built. It is built by ServiceNow and supported by ServiceNow. So if there are any issues, you just come to us regarding it. Obviously, we have a relationship with Zscaler. If our dev folks find some kind of an issue on our end or some kind of an issue on the Zscaler end, the two companies will work together to resolve this. Now, even though this is in the store, it isn't something that's chargeable. It's just that all of the security operations apps and updates are all released through the store. You would, of course, just have to have the Security Incident Response Pro or Security Operations Enterprise packaging from ServiceNow, and then, of course, the appropriate licensing with Zscaler. So I had intended to do a live demo, but I'm having some technical challenges this morning. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this, this demo recording, and then I can answer any questions. Let's go ahead and set that up. And oops, yeah. I'm going to pause for a second because I might not have chosen the right sharing option on that with the video and the, there we go. Okay. There we go. Do that again. All right, this should work a little bit better.
And Zscaler Internet Access supports 4 primary use cases. Number 1, threat lookup of observables against Zscaler's global threat library. Number 2, ability to block observables by adding them to URL categories and deny list in Zscaler. Number 3, ability to fetch Sandbox report by submitting an MD5 hash in Zscaler. Number 4, ability to create a security incident automatically out of patient zero alerts that get generated in Zscaler. Now let us begin this demo by understanding the different configuration in this integration. The first step is to establish a connection between ServiceNow and Zscaler. Here is a sample configuration record. We capture the server name, the API URL, username, password, and API key. The security admin can go ahead, validate, and save these details. As part of this integration, we support multi-tenancy that allows customers to configure more than one instance of Zscaler and use them at the same time. Now let us move on to understand how the URL categories are added within ServiceNow. For every instance of Zscaler that is configured, we auto-generate the deny list and allow list that correspond to blacklist and whitelist in Zscaler. In addition, the security admin can add additional URL category lists that are already configured in Zscaler. Let us see an example. The security admin can choose the server. As soon as the server is chosen, we fetch the list of URL categories available in that configuration. Let us add adware or spyware for this demo. The expiration period corresponds to the period that the observable added to this URL category would be active on Zscaler. By default, it is set to 0. If the administrator sets to a set number of days, now whenever an observable gets added, it would be auto-removed from Zscaler after the expiration period. We also support creating change requests as part of this activity, and the change request gets associated with this record. Only after the change request is complete will this record be active. Display tag functionality helps display security tags against incidents. Now the security tag gets auto-generated after we save this record. The other piece that we like to discuss is about require approval. This helps kick in approval workflow whenever observables are added to this URL category. By checking this, the security admin can choose the approval group that would be responsible for approving observable addition to this URL category. Now let us go ahead and save this record. We see that the security tags get auto-generated over here. The admin can use the auto-generated security tag or can go ahead and change these tags. These tags help in identification of security incidents when a particular URL category is used for blocking. Now let us move on to the sandbox configuration. For every instance of Zscaler that is configured, we auto-generate the sandbox configuration record. The administrator can go ahead and change these tags if required and set the record to active or inactive as may be required. Now, the last piece of configuration is about email notification configuration. This configuration is auto-shipped as an out-of-the-box feature. So this configuration helps in triggering an email to the users belonging to the approval group. So here is a sample approval email that the approver can use to approve or reject the observable addition. This would basically navigate the user to the record of approval. We will see this later in the demo. Now let us understand how security analyst gets benefited out of this integration. This is a sample phishing incident that gets created when a user reports a phishing email. As part of the automation, we extract the observables present within the phishing email. So we have leveraged the platform's flow designer to create a playbook that would guide the analyst investigate this incident. The steps are created as response tasks and available within the response task related list. So the first step is for the analyst to perform an observable threat lookup. Now, whenever an observable gets associated with the security incident for the first time, the threat lookup auto runs and updates the finding column. If required, the security analyst can perform an ad hoc threat lookup request by selecting the observable and choosing a run threat lookup option. Once the threat lookup action is complete, the work notes get updated and the results are available within the threat lookup results related list. Let's navigate to the threat lookup results related list to see the threat lookup findings. So we see that the observable is malicious, and we also have additional information such as the source, the version, and the history of threat lookups that have been performed. Now let us go ahead and block this observable because that is the next step suggested by the playbook. So if the observables are malicious, we can go ahead and block them by adding it to Zscaler's deny list or any URL category that we have configured. So let's choose the observable and select allow/block request. Now the analyst should be presented with the list of configuration. So let's choose the configuration that we had recently done and submit the request. We see that the work notes get updated and it is pending for approval. So let us go ahead and approve this request. So here is the approval request. Let us go ahead and approve this request. As soon as it is approved, the flow resumes and the work notes get updated with the latest status. So we see that the flow is resuming after the approval is complete. We should see that the flow is also successful and we can see that the tag gets added. Let us go to Zscaler. We see that the URL got added to the URL category. Let us get back to the security incident and understand what is the next step that the analyst has to perform. The next step is for the analyst to see if there is an MD5 hash and submit it to Sandbox to fetch the results. Now here, as part of this integration, we do not support live detonation of files or URLs. On the other hand, if the Sandbox report is already available on Zscaler, we would be able to fetch it and present it within the security incident by submitting the MD5 hash. So here we have the MD5 hash. Let us select it and submit it to the Sandbox. So the analyst would be presented with the configuration to select. So here we choose the configuration and submit it to the Sandbox. Once the integration is able to fetch the report and the flow is complete, the work notes get updated and the tags also get updated accordingly. So let us navigate to the result record to see the details. So we see that the observable information, the finding, and the submission status. In addition, we also get a detailed report that is available as part of the integration. So all of these details are fetched from Zscaler Sandbox and presented here as an HTML file. So we get the classification, the score, and other file properties for the analyst to perform the investigation or continue with the investigation. Now, the last use case is about creating a security incident out of patient zero alert. Here is a sample incident that got created out of the patient zero alert. Now, the only prerequisite is ServiceNow instances email ID need to be configured on Zscaler side for ServiceNow to start receiving these alerts. As part of the automation, we set the category of the incident to malware. We extract the complete description or body of the email and put it against the description field of the security incident. In addition, we also extract the MD5 hash and add them as observables for the analyst to go ahead and perform a sandbox report fetching action that would help in further analysis of the incident.
Great. So as you can see, the purpose of that integration is to be able to receive information from, hold on one sec. That didn't stop. There we go. It's playing in my ear. I don't know if you could hear that. So the purpose of the integration is to be able to create security incidents, enrich security incidents with additional threat intelligence from Zscaler, as well as submit the hash to Zscaler for analysis. And then, of course, be able to perform some sort of response, such as a URL or IP or hash allow or deny. And also, this is done in conjunction with capabilities in security incident response, where you can have an approval process, and or you can also send that down the path for a change management process as well, leveraging the integration into our ITSM change app. So I'll pause here for any questions. Look at the chat. I see there was some confusion about the link. I see the last one that Jamie posted. That looks right. It ends in ODG.
Yeah, I saw a question earlier about DC. So just for people to know, that's data centers. Zscaler is a global platform, and that's essentially a POP. So as your users connect to one of our POPs, then you can go and connect. So that's what DC stands for. Any other questions? Can you put them in Q&A? Looks like that might be it.
Well, I'll just make sure that I put the link where this recording is available. And if anyone has questions, they can always post it back on that community page.
There you go.
Do we have more to show today, or we good?
I think that's it. Back to you,
All
Lisa.
right. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. And let me put this really quickly into the chat. Here we go. And I'll go ahead and put the store and the demo video link also again into the chat before we end. Give everybody a moment to try to copy that down. This is also all this information is included on a YouTube link that is available in the community. And that's where that video is posted, on the community link that I had provided. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we hope to see you in our next session.